Hello, my name is Dr. Kelsie Nabben, and it's my pleasure to present this paper for Data for Policy 2024 on AI as a constituted system, accountability lessons from an LLM experiment. So this study explores the integration of a pre-trained large language model, or LLM, within an organization's knowledge management system via a chat interface. So the story really begins with a professional services organization that wants to reimagine how knowledge is managed and accessed and really augments people's practices within an organizational context and beyond the boundaries of that particular organization. And so the paper begins with a vignette around how the LLM integration happened with the data in the knowledge base. And that happened on a group call. I should mention that I do a bit of work with the organisation as well, which was called Block Science, which was the field site for this study. And so one of the lead architects on the project joined this group call, and the knowledge management system existed in a way that people could open a web interface and search the kind of database or the repository for, information, certain articles, certain policies, whatever. And he was addressing different groups of stakeholders within the company around how this might be improved, how people were using it, and so on. And the answer was that, for myself, was that I wasn't really using it. And so towards the end of this kind of long call, where sort of not that much progress was made, I sort of suggested, why not integrate the knowledge management system with an LLM? And so literally within the next week, this person had engineered a beta testing solution, and that was launched within the company's group chat application, that the platform Slack. And so all of a sudden there was kind of this explosion of experimentation with everyone able to type to the LLM, which we called KMS GPT, so Knowledge Management System Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And people were able to test and ask all these organizational specific questions. So innovations that we had come up with as a company, the LLM could generate answers on based on retrieval augmented generation, the way it was architected. And so by tracing this ethnographically, the paper focuses on the practicalities of establishing and maintaining AI infrastructure, as well as the considerations for responsible or accountable governance. And so I approach AI as a constituted system in this paper to emphasize the social, technical, and institutional factors that contribute to AI's governance and accountability. And this is really in response to some papers that came out from some of the major LLM development companies that present the idea of constitutional AI, or the idea that a group of people can, a large group of people, such as US citizens, can come together, create a plain English document in the form of a kind of constitution that is then fed to an LLM to align the LLM to those stakeholders' interests. But really in this paper, what I find and what I argue is that LLMs are broader than just sort of plain language interpretations, and there has to be considerations of these other factors around the technical architecture of the system, the institutional factors and drivers, and so on, which I'll go into in more detail. And so my findings indicate that LLMs can be effectively governed and held accountable to stakeholder interests, but within specific contexts. So what was important about the study that I conducted was that it was bounded within a particular organization. So the stakeholders were very clear, as well as the lines of accountability or authority. And so this challenges universal visions of AI, where there's kind of one model that's aligned to, a large group of people's interests, in favor of localized context-specific implementations. And Dr. Michael Zargam, the founder of the company where the study was conducted, calls this sort of more localized vision an idea of knowledge networks. And so I'll get to that. That's kind of where the paper ends and the next experiment begins. And so the contributions are threefold of this paper. The first is that I ethnographically show how an LLM was bounded and how it was governed in a practical real-world situation, which involved the operational leads of the company kind of stepping in once the LLM was launched in the Slack, asking many more questions about what data it was actually able to access, who was able to contribute to inputs and also generate outputs from the system, and how certain company rules would be respected, such as commercial in confidence or client data. It also provides an applied framework to analyze or design AI as a constituted system in the form of an easy-to-follow table, which I give specific examples from the case study ethnography, as well as exploring the policy implications of the research. And so it underscores the importance of crafting adaptable regulations, which are embedded in both the technological architecture of itself, as well as the social and institutional measures that bound and ensure AI is both innovative and accountable. And so what I mean by AI accountability, it really comes from this definition from Warringah, which draws on Boven's, which is a more legal approach. But we're looking at algorithmic accountability in terms of the analysis of actions taken between an actor and a group of stakeholders or a forum, and the relationship between the two, as well as the imposition of consequences. And so obviously we can't impose consequences on an LLM, but we can on a specific stakeholder or an institution and so on. And so in the context of a private organization, that's sort of the ultimate accountability is to them and then to the broader legal context that they operate in. And so we also know that one way to increase accountability in AI systems is to help designers identify the social, technical, and institutional context of a system. So this is drawing on science and technology studies approaches, such as Lucy Suchman, Warringah, who I've mentioned, and I'm also very inspired by the work of Susan Listar and so on in infrastructure studies. And so what we want is to move beyond the mere technical compliance or normative ethical guidelines and provide a more comprehensive, multi-scale and system-wide approach that encompasses social, institutional, technical, economic and organizational or legal consequences of an algorithmic system. And so the actual process of mapping how a system is architected and how decisions are made in relation to it, as well as what consequences can be made enforceable upon which actions, is the process of breaking down that definition of accountability and applying it in a real-world context. However, few guidelines or frameworks exist on how to practically do this. And so this is what the LLM, which we called KMS GPT, so Knowledge Management System Generative Pre-trained Transformer. This is what it looked like. So in the Slack chat interface in different channels, KMS GPT was added, and then we could just tag at KMS and talk to it. And so I contributed to some of the testing of the system, as well as ethnographically observing how people interacted with it as well. And in general, when it was first launched, people in the company were very excited about it. It was like a fun thing to interact with and to test, and also to see how it would draw on the organization-specific data that was supplied through retrieval augmented generation, or a specific database that the LLM could then access to generate its answers. So it was very specific to the kinds of questions that this complex systems engineering firm would ask, or specific innovations that they had come up with. And so that was all well and good, like I said, until the operations team sort of stepped in and started asking questions around data privacy, data security, and the kind of boundaries and limits of the system. And so the way that I break this down in the paper in the form of a table to actually map AI as a constituted system, firstly as a form of analysis of what was happening within the case study ethnography that I was looking at, but also as a design tool for people to think through before deploying a system, is the following fields. So mapping the social considerations of the system, such as stakeholder mapping and values. So, what's the company's mission and vision? What's its guidelines around behaviors and so on. Technical. So, for example, the foundation model that was used in this case study was ChatGPT, but the architects were looking at other systems as well, such as Mistral and other kind of open source solutions to not be bounded to one foundation model. I already mentioned that it drew on a RAG database to access sort of organization-specific data rather than just being a generalized system. And then obviously there's certain people with access to the back end of the system to help kind of architect it and design it. Economic considerations, for example, funding. And so this is a difference between a localized model, an experiment, and something larger scale. And then institutional, which I kind of break up into internal and external. So internal is kind of around the monitoring responsibilities. And so in the case of a services organization, there is a clear hierarchy and clear kind of lines of accountability, as well as policies around data management, privacy, conduct, and so on. And then there's external institutional factors. So the company is domiciled in the US and has to be compliant to US company law. And part of that is respecting the contracts which the company has with services partners or clients around data confidentiality and so on. And so the implications of mapping AI as a constituted system were several-fold. So for block science in the ethnography that I looked at, this web of accountabilities was relatively manageable due to its localized nature, defined set of stakeholders, and clear overarching organizational objectives. So people knew what KMS GPT was for. They also knew that it was in sort of a beta testing situation, and it was around augmenting professional services practices. Accountability is continuously negotiated amongst various actors, processes, and maintenance practices. So, the information security group that was set up in response to the launch of KMS GPT persisted and was a constant iterative process around how that was implemented, improved. And this allowed for clearer identification of accountability relationships, as well as enforcement of mechanisms to ensure accountability for the AI system. What I also extrapolate from this is that AI governance may be more complicated beyond the context of a relatively small organization, such as, at the scale of US citizens, like I mentioned before in some experiments. And so the ability to understand how a model is constructed, to verify that it's operating in line with normative principles and subjective values, or to intervene and change it becomes more complicated for general purpose AI at a larger scale. That's got a lot to do with the legibility as well. So this was, quite a highly specific case where people were very sort of technically literate, not a case where people couldn't sort of wrap their head around even how the system was architected or what data it was drawing on and how and so on. And by taking a context-specific and multi-dimensional approach to configuring algorithmic systems, the study shifts the focus from universally applicable AI solutions to more tailored context-specific strategies that clearly define stakeholders and accountability measures, with that bent towards augmentation of specific practices rather than universality in how the LLM is useful as well. And so, as I mentioned, this provides an alternative approach to this more blanket kind of concept of constitutional AI, taking values and kind of plain English approaches to alignment and expanding that to these other technical and institutional considerations. This provides broader scope for AI governance discussions compared to an approach of instructing an AI within just natural language. And so I mentioned this concept of knowledge networks, and the paper finishes with this idea of Project Goldfish, which is the next stage of where the initial beta of this LLM knowledge management integration kind of experiment. And so the goal of Project Goldfish is developing a deployable, governable, interoperable between organizations knowledge management system. And so really it's about scale, but again, this kind of grassroots or bottom-up approach where the first scaled approach is with a partner called MetaGov, an open research network and not-for-profit, also based out of the US. This experiment is called Knowledge Organization Infrastructure, or KOI-POND. And so this is about MetaGov having their own instance of a KOI in their case, or a KMS GPT, their own database, which that model is trained on and can draw on, and then observing how those two models actually interact and generate and share knowledge between organizations as well. So that's the next phase of the actual project I observed, also the next phase of the ethnography, which is a multi-sided one with other colleagues of mine from RMIT University, Ellie Rennie, and Brooke Ann Coco. And this research paper invites further investigation into the qualitative and quantitative aspects of AI as a constituted system, including the investigation into the applicability of this approach across various scales and contexts as new LLM models and technological advancements, as well as uses, emerge. And so I welcome questions and engagement on this. It's been a pleasure to provide this recording, and I look forward to presenting the paper as well and engaging with people for Data for Policy. Thank you very much.